Okay, so this is class. I'm back with mini lecture 4 of today's set of lectures on, thinking about food insecurity on the campus, food policy, and what might be some of the challenges where you have food as a shared responsibility of different levels of government. Now, thinking about this moving toward kind of the local scale, then is the idea of food deserts. Is that something that should kind of galvanize action at wherever, but including here in Alberta. So I'm going to share with you my screen and a couple recent studies. Okay, so the Alberta experience, the first analysis of food deserts that I know of in Alberta was done using data from about 2002 or 2003, published in 2006 by Schmoyer-Tomic, Spence, and Amrine. And Amrine was the vice president of the University of Alberta, who moved on a few years ago. They looked at using geographic information systems to identify, to assess, are there food deserts in Edmonton? And if there are, or if there were at that time, what were their characteristics? So to do that, then they found the locations of supermarkets. So they used supermarkets as their, the place where people could find, most likely to find healthy, affordable food. They overlaid that with neighborhood boundaries, which is something you can easily get here. And then characterize neighborhoods by whether they were within 1 kilometer of a supermarket or further away, 1 kilometer from a supermarket. I think that 1 kilometer would be kind of the furthest that someone might be able to walk comfortably to get groceries from a supermarket. That if you're further than 1 kilometer, it's likely you need some other form of transport. So we looked at that in a way, food access as part of the story, relative to food need. And food need, they indicated by the density of people, and then also relative to people's affordability of food for them, right? So they looked at the percentage of people who are low income. So if you're lower income, having affordable food should be more important to you. The percentage of people who have no vehicle, right? So that food access, it matters whether or not you have your own vehicle to get around with, if you're living further than 1 kilometer from the store. And the percentage of people who are greater than 65, people who may have some barrier in, more likely to have a barrier in being able to drive or being able to get around and to their food, to a grocery store. When they did that, these were the locations of the supermarkets, or the black dots. You can see situations changed. If you're familiar with Edmonton, you can see situations changed a fair amount since then. When they did their mapping, these were the 8 neighborhoods that they identified as having low accessibility and high need, with high needs defined in different ways. So they had, say, the shaded black area of Kildare had seniors and low income. The West Industrial area had low income. And then the other areas had high percentages of seniors. So with measuring that in different ways, or low income and no vehicles, so different combinations. So many more areas had low access, but these were the ones where there's also low access and a apparent needy population. So they identified these 9 food desert areas. Okay. My colleague Feng Chu and I have been looking at food deserts also in Edmonton. I did this when I was part of the Edmonton Food Council. And I'll show you a slide from this work. So this, in some ways, was an update of the Schmoyer-Tomic analysis using quite similar methodology. We also, one of the things we did beyond that was not just look at supermarkets, but also community gardens and farmers markets as potential outlets of food, and thinking about, did access to community gardens or access to farmers market, could that in some locations mitigate the lack of access to a grocery store. Here on the right is population density maps. We looked again, like Smarter Atomic, at areas that have a higher population density as having greater need, potentially. And then you can see the different types of food outlets. The supermarkets as red dots, and the community farmers think the community gardens are the green triangles, and farmers markets are the blue squares here. What we came up with then is we ended up with these four main. When we considered just supermarkets, we had 8 food deserts. When we thought about supermarkets and community gardens as sources of food, then 4 of those kind of dropped out. And then when we looked at supermarkets and farmers markets, then I think just 1 dropped out. So, so we could see kind of this, that one of the things we noted with this is that farmers markets tend to locate in places that already have good food access, to tend to locate actually near supermarkets, maybe for some of the same reasons. So having farmers markets didn't seem to alleviate per se food desert problems. For community gardens may, but again, community gardens are just providing certain types of food just for certain months of the year. So they are a limited reaction. What we found then is that, like Smarter Atomic, so interestingly, we didn't identify any of exactly the same neighborhoods, but we identified the same types of neighborhoods as Smarter Atomic. So these were places that are in older suburbs, so suburbs which had been built in the, say, the 1960s to 1980s. I think all of these suburbs built around that time, including some areas around where I live. Not in inner cities. So we had this sense from the US, kind of Baltimore, Detroit experience of this inner city core, of hollowed out inner city core being a place of food deserts. We don't find that for Edmonton. We're finding these older suburbs. So the newer suburbs at the edge of a city, most people, even if they have relatively low access, are mobile, have cars, maybe have higher incomes. So they can actually just drive to that. So places where there might be more people who, say, are seniors, might be people who are living in these older suburbs, and the suburb has aged as they have. We find these community gardens do tend to locate also in older suburbs, so they can be a part of the solution to that. Again, farmers markets locating in the same places as supermarkets. And therefore, we would basically say, we don't see farmers markets as really much of a solution, but community gardens may be part of the solution. So that's the analysis that we've done for back in 2014 in Edmonton. Fang and one of her students did a similar analysis for Calgary that I'll show you just in one slide. And this will be the last slide of this set. So they did similar work and with somewhat different kind of analytical approach. They had this idea of defining access. They found, a large number of neighborhoods that had relatively poor access, were further than 1 kilometer from the nearest supermarket. And then they said, well, which of those would we describe them as people who are unsupported, or places where there's some vulnerability? And they use these 3 measures of vulnerability, or being a lack of support, having a population greater than 65, and we did that also for Edmonton, but also the percentage of people who are less than 14, so the percentage of kids who have particular food needs, and poor supermarket access. When they did that, they found these 8 that they would define as unsupported having poor access, having high need, and perhaps more constraints in mobility by having more kids under 14 or more seniors over 65. And then of those 8, they identified food deserts to be just number 7 and 8, were places where there was also low average income. And those are interesting. One, the number 8 is right next to the Trans-Canada Highway. It's really kind of a busy spot at the edge of the city, kind of hemmed in some ways. Number 7 is near to the zoo, so it's northeast of the downtown core. It's interesting that has ended up being one of the food deserts. And then the suburbs on the northern side of the city. So I think that at least some of these are similar to the Edmonton story. There aren't that many of the neighborhoods which they identified as food deserts. Those are somewhat older suburbs that they identified as well. And for any of you knowing Calgary, I've also named these situations. So the names of the neighborhoods. So that's it for this set of lectures about food deserts. The next things we'll talk about is this idea of local food, as we're kind of locating food problems and food issues at these multiple scales: the international, the national, provincial, neighborhood scale, right to the scale of individuals in our communities and individuals at our university campuses. Local food has been identified as one of the possible solutions for dealing with these, especially for particular localities. So I'm going to stop sharing and sign off for today.